Just ask Lauren. She's like biggest fan of style components. It's a true story. Okay. All right. I apologize in advance for the styling, but some of our project solutions are not styled super well. Hopefully you're styling better, but that's okay. That's not what we want to focus on. All right. So we've got this thing that does a thing. Yay. These don't even come in right now. I think that's a problem with the dummy data. So don't worry about the styling. So let's talk about how this is being rendered conditionally based on this higher order component. Well, first of all, you can see that it's persisting beyond these updates or beyond refreshes, which means we have local storage built in. So if we want to log out, then we just clear that and refresh, and then we should be back at the login page. So already I can see from this that the higher order component is looking at local storage to see if we should be on the login page or to see if we should be on the posts page. So that's kind of the what's determining what content this higher order component is displaying. And that's very normal for a authentication piece in an app, so some login piece. It's very normal for us to put like a login token in local storage and then grab that token from local storage. When someone first loads the app, it'll grab that token from local storage, send that token to the back end and say, hey, is this token still valid? Can we use this? Is this person logged in? Is this person authenticated? So it's very normal to use local storage in this instance. It's not normal how we're using it, because that's very easy to fake, but we are, it's very normal to use local storage when authenticating someone. So let's take a look at the code for this. Actually, let's just hide browser. All right, get rid of dummy data. So let's see what's going on. Index.js. This is important to realize what's happening here. Who can tell me what we are importing on line 4? Okay, good. We're importing app. Who can tell me what app is? This is a trick question, by the way. It is a component, very good. It's a class component, yes. What is app? Let's take a look. App, so we're importing something from this file, right? Something is being imported from this file. So if we go to this file, app.js, we see that something is being exported, and it's not this component. So in this case, app is not being exported. If app was being exported, it would look like this, right? And then we would just go straight to the post page, because that's exactly what app does. App displays the post page. So we're not exporting and importing the app component. What we're exporting out of here, and therefore importing here, is whatever this piece of JavaScript code returns. So this is a function that we're invoking. When we invoke this function, we're passing in this component. And whatever is returned by this function is what we're exporting from this file. So let's take a look at authenticate and see what exactly is being returned by this authenticate higher order component. So we go to components, authentication, authenticate. Components, authentication, authenticate. Okay, we already know that it's a function, right? We can look at this right here and say, oh, this is a function because it's being invoked. So we know that authenticate is a function. We see that here. So what is being returned by this function? Well, we don't have curly braces. So whatever is to the right of the arrow function, right here, everything highlighted right here is being returned by this component. So when we invoke authenticate the function and pass in a component, we invoke authenticate, pass in a component, it's going to return this component right here. So this is the component right here, that everything that's highlighted, not app, not the HOC, but this inside here, this class component is what is being imported right here. Okay, let's look at it one more time. We're importing app, we're importing something. Don't let the name confuse you. We can name this whatever we want. We'll just call this foobar. That's it right here, foobar. We're importing something from this file, from app.js. So we go to app.js. What's being exported as the default, it's a function invocation. When a function is invoked, it's going to return something, more than likely. So whatever this invocation is returning is what's being exported out of app.js. So we go to that function, we look at the return value, which we know is everything to the right of the arrow. So this class function, or this class component, is what's being returned out of authenticate. And so that's what's being imported as foobar right here. So then React.dom.render is going to display foobar. So what is foobar? Foobar is a component, a class component, that's got some state, which we see is logged in. When the component mounts, we're going to check local storage to see if we're logged in and change our state to tell us if we're logged in or not. If we are logged in, then we return this component, which got passed in here. If we're not logged in, then we return this component. So this component gets passed to index.js, and it's going to render one of two things. It's going to render app, or it's going to render login page. And we can see all of this under the hood if we look at our React tools. So we've got this higher order component thing, class component thing happening. It doesn't have a name, it's unnamed, but we know it's a class component with logged in state. So we know that what's got logged in state, this component right here. Look, it doesn't have a name. No name. So it shows up in the React tools like this. Okay, any questions on that? Yes. True statement. We can call the component whatever we want when we import a component, only if it's the default import. If we were to export not default, which we'd have to do it a little bit differently, but if it was a named export, then we'd have to call it the right name, the correct name, and wrap it in curly braces. But it's a default export. Any default export can be named whatever you want when you import it. Even if it's a named export, you can import that named thing and then rename it. So foobar as app. And then you would use app right here. So you can rename named exports as well. That's just a little more verbose. But default exports, you can, where you import it is where you decide what it's going to be called in that file. Good question. Okay, how would logout access the state of authenticate if the main page component is being called from app? That's a good question. You'd have to find a tricky way to wire logout, the logout functionality, without forcing a page refresh. So probably the easiest way to do it is click logout and force a page refresh. The logout button would remove your user object from local storage, and when you refresh the page, it will rerun this stuff here. Yeah, that's probably the easiest way to handle that situation. Unless you want to write another higher order component that will consume these other things. Yeah, there's ways to do it. We're not really going to get into that right now. Let's see. So Steven says, this is a good question. If the whole point of a single source of truth is to have a single source of truth, don't HOC patterns break this paradigm by carrying state in different places? I can understand where you're coming from, but if you're writing HOCs correctly, you still have just one source of truth. So the state gets carried to different places, but it's still only being managed in one location. So the point of, when we say single source of truth, we really mean single source of truth, of single place to manage your data. So your data can be all over your application, but you only want it managed and changed in one place. And that happens here. Logged in is a piece of data. Now you can set local storage in a lot of different places throughout your app, but logged in will only ever be changed right here. And so this becomes a single source of truth for whether or not you're logged in, not whether or not local storage is being changed, just whether or not you're logged in. Okay, what else we got? So, could we pass both the login and app component to the authentic, then pass them back conditionally? Yes, you can, and yes, it would be advisable. So what I would change in this solution is I would not import login page. Instead, let me do that. Instead, I would import login page here, and I would invoke this twice, which means that authenticate would have to be written like this. Now we have access to both things here, but we're getting an error anyways. Could not find path login. Oh, that's because we have to change the path. And there we go. So this is how you would normally see an HOC written. I still need to update the project to reflect this, because this is a more normal way of seeing an HOC. You wouldn't want to import anything in here. You want to pass it in as an argument. So now what's happening is authenticate is being invoked the first time and being passed app. What does that return when we invoke authenticate the first time? It returns another function. So then we invoke that other function that just got returned, and we pass in login page. And what does that return? That returns the class that we're trying to get to. So you could pass in 5 HOCs or 5 components and just keep invoking this. You'd have another invocation here, other components. And what's cool about this pattern is every component that you pass in is going to be available in the innermost thing, in the innermost function, innermost class, because of closures. So cool. You guys remember closures from your time with Josh? This is a perfect example of a closure. You've got your innermost function. Classes are just functions, right? So you've got your innermost function that's being used right here. And that function has access to all of the outer functions and their variables. So this is really how we would write an HOC. It's like this. Yay. What is this magic? This is called, the name is escaping me. Ashwin probably said it. Currying, yes. This is currying functions, invoking things twice. Get used to this pattern because we're going to see this again with Redux, this currying pattern. You don't have to really get used to it, but you'll see the pattern again soon. Is there any reason to double invoke method is better than just doing something like... that's a good question. Mostly that, I don't know. I don't know why we don't do this. But most HOCs you see are set up like this. Maybe because once you're at the point that you're writing this kind of code, you just think it's cooler because you can do it, and so you do this. Haha. I have no good answer for you. Closer thing, once more. Yes. Okay. We can take time to do this real quick because today's easy. So let's write authenticate a little bit different. Let's not use arrow functions. Let's say function that takes in a component. It's going to return a function that takes in a component. It's going to return this class. Okay, then we can get rid of this. Do we have too many curly braces? I think we're good. Okay, so written without arrow functions, we see that authenticate is a function that takes in a component. Remember, we get to name this whatever we want. Banana. Okay, this is just a name that we are making up, but we are going to keep it app. Okay, a function that takes in a component that returns a function. So if we invoke authenticate and set it to like a const variable, then we could invoke that const variable because the value of invoking authenticate is a function. And then we invoke that function again, and then we get to this class. So when we do this the first time, what's being returned the first time? Well, when we invoke authenticate, we get a function. And then when we invoke that function that gets returned out of this, we can immediately invoke it again and pass in login page. What does that return to us? A class. So now that we've invoked this twice and passed in app and login page, the innermost thing inside here, so this class has access to both of these arguments that get passed in. So that's what closure is we can now take this class, like right here, like we do with this, and when we use this class right here, it still has access to app, and it still has access to the login page. So when it's up on the screen, it still has access to both these things because of closure, because it's wrapped inside these two functions. And so that's why this works to put, let's change this back to app, or we'll call this component HOC. So we'll take whatever the component that is returned from our HOC. This gets put on the screen, has access to both login page and app, and can toggle the two depending on this logic here. So prime example of closures. Nested functions that have access to anything outside of there. You could do something like const message equals hello from authenticate, and then use that in this inner app, right? So you've got a function, or you've got a variable in this outermost function. You can reference this variable in the innermost function. So it's the same thing with app. App right here is just a variable whose value is this component. So we can use that variable anywhere inside our inner function, and we do right here. Closures, woohoo! Yes. So let's look at it again. Instead of using the function keyword, we'll make this into one at a time, we'll make this into an arrow function. So arrow functions are written like this, right? Instead of braces, we're going to do that. Now, and since we're not using curly braces here, it's just an implied return, so we can get rid of the return. So there's our outermost function, an arrow function that returns a function. So let's turn this function into an arrow function. This one's going to be unnamed, an anonymous arrow function. And there we go. And since we're doing the implied return, we get rid of that return keyword. And those two brackets. So there we go. Our innermost thing is a class. Wrapped around that is an anonymous arrow function. Wrapped around that is an anonymous arrow function. And all of that is set to the value of this variable. Okay, holding on. Lydia says, what are you rendering in index.js? Not app anymore, or you just changed the name? So, yes, I agree. So, what is in index.js? At the start of the lesson, I asked you, we had this, right? And I asked, what is this thing that's being imported from app? So who can, now that we've gone through this, who can answer what this thing that's being imported is? What is this that's being imported from the app file? Yeah, it's the default export. So what is being exported out of app? Whatever's being exported out of app, let's look at it. We're exporting this whole JavaScript expression. So what does this JavaScript expression evaluate down to? It evaluates down to the component that's returned from the higher order component authenticate. Yes, yes. We're getting there. Good, so this JavaScript expression evaluates down to this class. Someone said this. So Yasira, this isn't quite true because it's actually this entire class is being passed all the way to here, and then it's only going to render either the app or the login. But this app, whatever's right here being imported, is the entire class that's being returned out of authenticate. If that makes sense. Okay. So for the closure, the inner functions can see and use all the functions, declared, defined, and upper functions. Is that true for the variables too? I kind of forget how lexical scoping and block scoping works. Yes, that is true. So if we had where we were at a little bit ago with our functions like this, and we had we declare a function. Inside that function, we declare a variable called message. We can use this variable inside this function right here. We can access it anywhere here. We can access this variable anywhere inside this class. So yeah, closures work by anything that is declared in a higher scope. So this class has its own scope, and this function that wraps this class cannot access like this dot state. So we can't get this dot state up here, nor even higher in this function. But message is declared in this function's scope. So any inner function can access message because it's in a higher scope. Almost back. Okay. So just like declaring a variable, the innermost thing, in other words, this class is the innermost thing in this function chain, can access app and login page. So that's the closure part of this process. Yep, or anything in its own scope. And this is going back a little bit, but correct. The nameless class, this class is not named. I wonder what would happen if we named it. The real app. Let's go see if that, oh, there it is. The real app. I called it the real app because this is kind of a fake thing. This is not really app. This is more like the post wrapper, post page wrapper. There. Will the real app please stand up? Please stand up. If we log in, we'll see. No, don't save it. The post page wrapper, which wraps post page. So that's where it gets a little bit confusing, I think, in this particular project, is that we've called this app and that we've imported app here. So it's so deceiving because you automatically think this is rendering this, but it's not. It's not rendering this. It's rendering what's returned from this. So I apologize for the confusion. Cool. For this is saying if this.state.loggedin is true, then return the app. If false, return login page. Why is syntax so different? Is this ES6? Let's see. So with an if statement, if you're just doing a one-liner, you don't have to wrap this in curly braces. And normally with if statements, we see something like this, right? So this is how we normally see if statements. If we're just doing that and we don't have a then we don't need the curly braces. So this is a valid if statement. Now, let's go back to this. If we see a return inside a function and we get to this code, if we are logged in and we get to this code and it returns app, then we break out of this function and we never touch this line right here. So the reason that this works is if we really are logged in and this is a truthy expression. So if logged in equals true, we hit this return, we return this component, and we never even touch this line of code. So this works because of how returns inside functions work. If this is false, then we skip this part and we go to this return and we return this component. So this is not actually an if-then statement. This is simply an if with a return. and we're using the fact that that hitting a return in a function will break us out of the function and not evaluate the rest of the code inside there. We're using that fact to just make our code a little bit shorter. So we easily could write this like, why am I saying then? Else, that's the word I'm looking for. We could easily write it like this, right? If we're logged in, return app, else return login page. But if you're using returns inside if statements, then you can shorten everything up just by saying, if we're logged in, run this return, and you'll never get to this line of code. Good questions. Oh, yeah, so the login returns, or this evaluates down to whatever logged in is. So where are we setting logged in state? This dot set state. We're setting it false if there's no local storage item called user, and we're setting it true if there is a local storage item called user. So if there's nothing called user in local storage, we set it to false. If there is something in there called user, we're setting it to true. This is the fake part. Usually this would happen in the database. Which kind of goes back to the question that I saw earlier. Where did we start? So Ben asked, when you see token here, what do you mean? Do you mean data? All right, so let's look at this one more time. So we've got our user object here, so we are logged in. So we're logged in there. Normally, when you log into something, let me see if I've still got this running. Aha, I do. So for example, this is an app I'm working on. So let's look at there's the live location of these two vehicles. One right there, one up there. Pretty cool. They've got little devices that are sending their location to our server, to our database, and I just accessed our database to get the location of those cars. But what we want to look at is the token. So in local storage, I have set this token to local storage. And basically what a token is it's a string that's been sent back from the server. So you can see this down here is the token. So if I send this token to the server and say, is this a valid token? Is there someone logged in that with this token? Then it can parse this token and it can check to see if there is indeed someone logged in or not. If it's an invalid token, then we would get out of here. Then we wouldn't let the person access this page. They would go to a login page. So that's what a token is. It's basically just a string that's been, it's kind of like a private string, not a private string, but a tokenized string that your server will recognize and be able to tell you if that person is logged in or not. So that's kind of what it looks like there. We won't get too much into that. You'll get into that a lot more with backend stuff. I have no clue. I cannot answer that either way. All right, I think, was there one more that I missed? I think that was the question I wanted to come back to. Okay, cool. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll get into the stuff for today. Okay, come on back. Let's see. We're good here. Get rid of these. We need that. That could go down there. All right. So today is CSS and JS. We're going to start real quick, just briefly talk about React Strap before we get into styled components, which styled components is CSS and JS. React Strap is just a library to bring in Bootstrap components that are React components, have been built into React components. So it's not CSS and JS, but it's good to know about and practice with. So let's learn about React Strap. We'll do that briefly, and then we'll talk about styled components. So what I like about React Strap is that we can use React Strap to practice using third-party libraries. And because you'll use third-party libraries quite a bit in development. So this is a good way to get a little bit of practice doing that. So to get started with React Strap, let's go to their documentation. I'll pass this on to you guys. Okay, so to get started, we install React Strap. We've got React and React DOM already. So we're going to install React Strap, which we do like this. Yay, now we have React Strap. Okay, then we import components that we want to use. So for example, we want to import the button component. Let's try that real quick. So we're going to import the button component down and use it down here. So now we have the button component. The button. Oh, I think we also need the style sheet, if I'm thinking correctly. Adding Bootstrap. Yes. So we also have to add Bootstrap to the index.js file. And then we can use these. So that's 2 steps. Install the, here we go, install React Strap, and we're going to need to install Bootstrap as well. So 3 steps: install Bootstrap, install React Strap, and get the CSS file from Bootstrap. So let's do that before we try to use our button. Bootstrap. Okay. Now, just like we've imported this style sheet here, we can import a style sheet from Bootstrap. So we just do this. And this works just like any of these from up here. When we're importing something from a library, we don't start with /. This works for CSS files as well. So // means there tells the computer that there's a file in my source folder. No / tells it to look for whatever I'm importing from my dependencies. So I'm going to install that, and there we go. Now we've got our button styling. Ooh, and it changed all of our header stuff too. I'm going to import this, and I'm going to import my CSS below this one so that my CSS overrides anything that's happening in the Bootstrap. So I want my CSS file to win. that war, that battle. Okay, so now that we've really got it set up correctly, there is our button. So let's go look at, we just imported a real React component that somebody else wrote from a different library. So let's take a look at it here. We can inspect this button. We're going to go to React. And now we see this button component with a couple props passed down to it already. But we haven't passed props down to it. So these are default props, which you can set up with prop types. So let's go into the documentation and see if there's other props that we can maybe pass down that will change this component a little bit. So we'll go to React docs, we'll look at components, come down to button, and we can see that we can pass in a color prop. If we go down here, we can see all the props that we can pass in. So let's do, let's try a different color. Let's go with this success color. So if we pass down color equals this string as a prop, then it changes the color. Woohoo! So that's pretty cool. Someone wrote the code to look at whatever value is being passed to the color prop and change the background color, the hover color, the text color based on what this string is. So that's neat. What else can we do? We can pass an onClick function. Well, cool. OnClick is going to be a function that, there we go, that says alert, you clicked me. Ah, and it worked. So you can pass a function down for the onClick callback. What else they got? They got size. We can do different sizes. Let's see. Let's start dropping these down because we want to see this in a list, like so. I think this is like large, medium, small, and it changes the size of our button. Let's change this to primary, large. Ah, you clicked me. Cool, what else we got? Disabled. Ooh, this is a good one. So disabled takes a Boolean. So if we pass in disabled equals false, well, then our button's enabled. But if we pass in disabled equals true, now we can't click it. So what's cool about this? Well, let's say we had a form with 4 inputs, and you wanted this button to be disabled until they've typed in all 4 of those inputs. You could do a JavaScript expression here that said, is there value in all 4 of those inputs? If there is, return false, so that this is now enabled. So if there's value in all 4 inputs, then we could return false or pass in false. If any of the 4 inputs are missing their value, then we pass in true to make this disabled and stop your users from clicking that button. Side note real quick, if you don't want to do this dynamically, if you just always want this to be disabled, whenever you pass in true, you can actually just delete all of that. Just type disabled and it passes in the Boolean true. If you want to pass in just false, you need to pass in false. But if you have any prop that takes a Boolean and you always want to pass in true, you just have to type the prop out and it passes in true. It's kind of like the string shortcut, because we could do this, right? And we still get a large button, but we don't need to do curly braces, we just pass in a string. If we want to pass in true, you just do it like that. So that's neat. Let's see. So tag looks like it's going to pass in a component to override the default button element. So you could pass in another tag for this. You'd have to read up on what that is. Yeah, so there's quite a few different properties that you can play around with. We can pass in outline. So outline looks like it's a property that when you pass in this, remember it's just passing in the value true. So if you take the button component, pass in outline, then it turns it into an outline. So what I want you to get from this part of the lesson, what I want you to learn is how to go into documentation for a third-party library, look at their examples, look at their properties list, and start to learn how you can use their custom components inside your code. So if we take a look at this now that we've passed a bunch of things in, now look at the props list that's been passed in. We pass in color, size, tag was already passed in, outline, on click. So we're passing in props because we know from their documentation what each prop is going to do. And this is a very normal thing for in your everyday development, is to be using third-party libraries, or maybe it's not even a third-party library. Maybe it's just a design library that your company has built that's kind of an internal thing, but someone else wrote a bunch of components that you have to start using, and you need to know how those components interact, what props they need, what they're going to do, and with different props in different situations. Sizes, active state, yeah. And then look at this long list of all the different components that the Bootstrap team has built for us. So this is really good to start using in projects, just if only for the time that you get practicing using someone else's components that's been written. Cool. Any questions? Yes, this is correct. If we go to, it's mostly correct because instead of npm install, you have to do yarn add. So you have to know the right yarn command for if you're just going to replace npm. Okay. I think I dropped it right there. Boop. reactstrap.github.io. Same one, you're good. Just click on the components list right up here, and it gives you the list of components. Does this have, okay, nope. All right, now the fun stuff for today and what we're actually going to be doing in our project for today is CSS in JavaScript. So how can we write CSS in JavaScript? Well, we know we can write HTML type things in JavaScript with JSX. So we're going to learn now how to write CSS type things in JavaScript. And here's a good article on, or video on, why use styled components. So I suggest watching that at some point. Max Stoiber is the author of the styled components library, and he just talks about why we would want to use styled components. Okay, so now let me pull up my notes over here, sorry. All right, now we're going to write some code with the styled components library. And I'm going to show you the syntax. It's a little bit goofy, but it's really fun. And I'm excited for this part. And Lauren's excited for this part because she loves styled components. So to get started, we have to add our library. Styled components. Okay, we've got our styled components in here. We don't have to do any of this stuff like we did with React Strap. We're just going to take that out of there. Oh, you know what? Let me leave this in here and save it. Pass this on to you guys. And we'll start a new code sandbox. Okay, and at this point, please open up your own sandbox and we'll do follow along for this, for styled components, because this is what we're doing in the project today. So go ahead and open up a new code sandbox and add styled components as a dependency. All right, we've got our sandbox up. We've got styled components added here. Again, start this on your own. I'm not dropping this link yet for you guys to fork off of this because you can start your own at this point. So we've added styled components. Now all we have to do is import styled from styled components. Wait a second. Yeah, that's correct. So it's super easy to get started with styled components. Okay, so let's see what this styled thing is all about. All right, so here's the documentation for styled components. Very easy to get started. You install and then you import. Easy peasy. Now we're going to create a component. So just like the name suggests, we are creating components, and these components are going to be styled with JavaScript. So we're going to create a reusable, simple and reusable button component. So we'll start here. We'll say const button equals styled dot button. All right. So outside of our app component, we're going to say const button equals styled dot button. So create that component, and then let's take a look at this. This is a little weird. So now we've got these backtick marks right here. All right, so let's do some backticks. Okay, that's weird. What does it say about this? So this unusual backtick syntax is a new JavaScript feature called tagged template literal. So let's click on that and see what tagged template literal is. So tag templates is a more advanced form of template literals. Tags allow you to parse template literals with a function. So if we've got a function called myTag, we can come down here and invoke that function with these backticks. And then it does some fancy things with the arguments that we don't need to learn right now. But I want you to know, what I want you to know is that when we do this, we are invoking a function. So super cool, super strange, super weird, but really cool. So we're invoking a function. So styled looks like styled is an object that has a button property that's a method. So this button method we're going to invoke. And it's going to return, I don't know, something. Let's see what it returns. So we're going to just pass in this button right here. Well, let's pretend that this is going to be like an actual button, because that's what I would assume. So let's do that, and let's say, is this a button? Oh, look at that. Let's open up and check it out under the hood. Is this a button? Oh, look. It is. It's totally a button. Whoa. Come to the React tools, and okay, things just got a lot more complicated, but that's okay. React tools says that we've got this component called style.button, which is right here. So remember, a component is just a function, right? So this function, this button function that we invoked, is literally just returning a button. And then it's got some context stuff going on, and then it returns our button. So cool. All right, so we've got a button now returned by this. So we've created a component called button that is basically just rendering a normal button. So now what can we do? What can we pass into this button invocation right here to actually style our component? Because that's the point of this, right? Styled components is to get styles out of this. All right. If you render our lovely component now, just like any other component, this is what you get. I'm a button. It renders a button, like we just found out. Cool. Zoom in a little bit. That's not a very nice button though. Sad face. We can do better than this. Let's give a bit of styling and tickle out the hidden beauty within. All right, so let's look at this syntax. Anything that comes in the tick marks here is kind of like it showed down here. You pass in some template things here. The styled components library is going to take what we pass in and add this styling that we pass in, this CSS type styling, to our button. So let's pass this in. hand this to you guys here. Okay, there's that. Copy that and let's pass it into our button. Oh. Ah, cool. So let's take a look at this now. Let's inspect this on our page. So we're going to look at it in the Elements tab. We're going to click on our button. We see that it's been given this weird class name, SC for styled components, of course. So we know that this is like a styled components internal class that it's giving our button. And then this obviously is as well. So we look at what's on this class, and it's all the styles that we just passed into that template literal function invocation. So everything that we just passed in here has been added to the styling right here. And that's it. That is styled components. But this is like, okay, why would we write this, right? So this is kind of cool, but what's the point of doing this when we could just do this all within CSS? Well, this goes a lot deeper and a lot more fun. All right, so we passed in, we've got to this point. Styled components lets you write actual CSS in your JavaScript, which is awesome. So you can use all the features of CSS you love, including media queries, pseudo selectors, nesting, et cetera, et cetera. So we could do like styled button, and then you can do Sass styled nesting. So some class, and then do more stuff here. Maybe it's less, maybe it's without. Not sure. We'll look at that in a second. But yeah, you can do all sorts of cool stuff here. Before, and then whatever you would want, or focus, or first of type, pseudo selectors. A lot of cool stuff. But it gets even cooler. So all the cool stuff, CSS stuff that you love, media queries, etc. So the last step that we need to define what a primary button looks like. Okay, so we're trying to get to this. We're trying to get to a reusable component that shows this outline that we have right now for a normal button, and then if we pass in primary for important buttons. See, that's what they say here. Primary version for the important buttons. So the last step that we need to define what a primary button looks like. To do that, we import CSS from styled components and interpolate a function into our template literal, which gets past the props of our component. So what this means is if we pass props to our component, so we're going to do props.primary. We're going to pass a prop to our component down here called primary. So let's make a new instance of this. So create a new instance and ask if this is a primary button. And then we're going to pass down the prop primary. And we're going to do it, pass in the value true by not passing in anything at all. So just type out primary, and that gets us props.primary equals true. So now let's go look at the syntax here. We're going to import CSS in a second. So we're going to create a function right here that takes in all the props that get passed to this component. We're going to check for props.primary, and then this is new syntax that we'll go over in a second. If props.primary is true, we're going to add more CSS than what's added here. All right. Drop a couple lines down inside our button component, and we're going to do template literal string, right? So we can do a JavaScript expression inside here. So we're going to pass in a function, and that function is going to take in props. Okay, so any props that we've passed in to this button are now available right here. So we're going to say if props.primary, so the shorthand of doing this is pretty simple. So if this is true, do this. If this is false, do nothing. So if you want to do that, but shorthand, take away the do nothing part and change this to $ampersand. But what this basically says is if this is true, then do this. If it's false, then do nothing. We're going to look to see if props.primary is true, which it will be for our second button, and it will be false for our first button. So if this is true, then we're going to do something here. What is that something? Well, we need this CSS thing we need to import CSS. So scroll up and do styled comma CSS from styled components. So if this is true, what are we missing here? Okay, we're going to take away the curly braces. If this is true, we'll do some CSS, and we're going to invoke this CSS function. And we're going to pass in these two colors right here, these two properties. Okay. Pass that in. And then something happens. We need to see where we've gone wrong. White CSS. Oh, we broke something. Just copy and paste a little bit here. Hey, it looks exactly the same. Oh, and thank you. I did import CSS. So the way I've done this is without CSS. Obviously something is breaking because neither of our buttons are working here. Well, that's good. Maybe it's our import that broke. Might be a good time for a quick break while I fix whatever we did. Oh, okay. Maybe this was just not refreshing. That would be the worst ever. Oh, huh. This stinking thing. This was just not refreshing. Well, yay, we did it. Woohoo! Go us. That makes me really mad that it was just this refreshing broken. And I thought all my code was off. Okay, so there we go. Cool. So now we have, let's say we take this out and we put it in its own file. We can import this anywhere we want in our application. And now we have, like literally we wrote the React strap library. We wrote a button component that takes in a prop and changes the appearance of that button based on whether this prop is passed in, just like we saw with React strap. So super cool that we can very quickly kind of create our own style library of components and bring those in, use these components anywhere in our application. All right, we're going to take one last short break, and then we've got just kind of a fun, quick little thing to build and work on together, and then we'll go over the project for today. So I will see you back in 5 minutes. Okay. Here we go. So let's get rid of these guys. And we'll keep styled components up here. By the way, before we jump into this exercise, let's look at the documentation here. There is a lot that we can do with styled components. I mean, the documentation is really great. Let's see. So we kind of talked about this, adapting based on props. We can do different things like have a normal button or a primary button based on the props that get passed in. We could say, you could make this. So you could say the color depends on props. You could do it kind of how we did it, where you add CSS based on a prop that comes in. And you could change it and say, if it's primary, then we want this color. If it's success, then we want a blue color. If it's a warning, we want a yellow color. So there's a lot that you can do, and you can pass in all different props just like that. So this one is really cool. So let's take a look at this. So this button is a component, okay? We've invoked this function. It returns a component. This is a component with that we just built out, that normal button right there. We built out this exact same component. Well, then we create a new component by invoking a function, passing in a component. See, button's a component, so we're passing in a component. And by invoking a function and passing in a component, we get returned a new component with extended functionality. So what does that sound like to you guys? What's a component that takes it? Yes, NHOC. Woo! So cool. NHO styled component. So clever. That's the first I've ever seen that, actually. Nice. So HOCs. I told you we would see this again. Styled is an HOC. It's a higher order component. You can pass in a component. It's going to return a component. And the job of this HOC is to extend functionality to this component that's being passed in. It doesn't return button. It returns a brand new component with everything on button plus some new stuff. So this is the two big use cases for HOCs are: one, conditional rendering that we practiced yesterday; two, extended functionality. So we could pass in whatever we pass into here is going to have these two things extended onto it. Whether it's a button or a div or a header, whatever we pass in here is going to have its functionality extended. And that is the other big use case for a higher order component. Aren't you glad we learned that yesterday? HOCs, they're the best. They're tough though. So anyways, we extend styles using an HOC. I don't know if they say anything about HOCs up here. Doesn't look like they are. Styling any component, passed props. So we talked about passing props like this. Oh, gives you default value. So the prop being passed is type. The default value is this, whatever they're passing in here. So take a look at all this. There's a lot that you can do with styled components. All right. Now what we want to do is jump into here, fork this sandbox. And you'll open it up and you'll see that we have a boring header. Bum, bum, bum. So in the app component, we have our wrapper div, and we have this styled component, which is coming from the styled JavaScript page here. So let's open up styled. And what we see is nothing special. We've got some state. This is, by the way, this may be the first time you've seen state declared this way outside of a constructor. Now that you are very familiar with constructors and writing constructors, I will introduce you to this syntax. So, but if you want to use this, you can, but I would encourage you to go look up declaring React state outside of constructor and just read about it a little bit. All right, so we've got some state. This.state.color right now is boring. So where are we using this .state.color? So inside our H1 header, we've got this is a boring header. All right, pretty simple. Then we've got a couple buttons that have class names that are doing the styling. So there's some styling. The regular button styling, take away the blue focus, highlight thing, and then change the background depending on the class name. So pretty straightforward, nothing we haven't seen before. All right, so let's do this. Let's create we're gonna come outside of this class, and we're going to create a component called header. I've already imported styled for you. So let's create an H1 component, and we're going to replace this H1 element with our header component. So how do we do that? We call style.h1. Any element that you want to create, you just do style.that element. So all of these work. Any valid HTML tag will work here. So we want to make this a not boring header. We want to make this a cool header, a colored header, a styled header. So we're going to do this with style.h1. And we're going to use our backticks. And then we're going to pass in something here. So we could do some normal CSS, like we could say text decoration, underline. You know, we could do some stuff that's just going to apply CSS stuff to here. But what we want to do is something a little different. And I'm going to let you guys practice this for a couple minutes, and then I'll come in and do it with you. What we want to do is we're going to pass in a prop that's going to be a color. Now you'll see down here that our buttons, when we click on a button, it's going to update our state with that color. So when you click on blue, this .state.color becomes whatever we clicked on. So we're using the event.target.className to pass this string to our state, and it's going to update our color. So let's do this. We've got this header component. We're going to replace this H1 with our header component. Like that. Now we have a boring header. what I want you to do is pass in a prop to this component, and the value of that prop is probably going to be this state.color, hint, hint. And inside this component, I want you to change the color of our header to match the color of whatever is passed in here. Okay, you're gonna have to do a little bit of detective work to figure out what these colors are, and you're going to have to write a few functions inside here. And then, so you'll have to maybe look at the documentation, whatever, but if we click on blue, we want the color of this header to turn to blue. If we click on red, we want to change it to red, green, yellow, etc. So I will let you work on that for, I don't know, we'll say 5 minutes, and we'll see where we get to. We may need 1 or 2 minutes beyond that, but then we'll have to come back together. So 5 minutes, we'll see if that's enough time, and good luck. Okay. Nobody else responded here, so it looks like we can move on. Lydia has spoken, so we will obey. Just kidding. All right. So would anybody like to share a solution for how you accomplished this task? All right, so we'll go into styled. Nice. So color equals whatever color we press on. So we push on green, we get green. Red, we get red. Yellow, we get red, yellow. Cool. Great job. Easy peasy. Did anybody figure out a way to get the colors of the buttons, get the color of the header to match the color of the buttons? What do I mean? So here we just have the color red, but it's not quite the same red. Green, this isn't the same green. These aren't the same here. So this is just applying the color red or green or blue as the actual color. So what if we wanted to do something like use these colors here? Then instead of like blue, green, red, yellow. So that makes it a little bit more complicated. And that's fine. I did not explain that requirement very well. So you guys did it absolutely perfect. And this is a very concise way to write it. So that's perfect. So let's look at what if we have, what if we don't want to just do props.color for the color? Well, we can do something like pass in props dot, what do we have? Props dot color. Does props dot color equal blue? Then if it does, let's grab our blue coloring, copy, and we'll say we can do this one of two ways. We could do color like this, or we could even do color right here. And then just null that out. Except this has to be in backticks because we're inside that. We want this to be a string, this whole thing to be a string, minus this part, of course. Okay, so there we go. We could do it like this, where we say color is, and then if props.color equals blue, and color becomes that, otherwise null. And then there we go. Or we can do it this way, where we set the color property here inside a template literal. I guess we don't even have to do that. We could just do this. Then we would click on blue. Oh, no, maybe we do have to do that. Well, good. If it equals blue, that's okay. We'll just keep going off this example. This totally worked in my practice stuff that I have in another sandbox. So since we don't want to spend lots of time figuring that one out, we'll just go through this whole thing. And we'll we'll get all of these styles, these colors here. Now we have those actual colors, our headers matching these actual colors here. So this is probably what something like React Strap, like Bootstrap does. They're not just going to match the blue color or the green color. They're not just going to say color equals blue, color equals green. Like they have their own defined colors for like a success green button. So they're checking and they're saying if blue is passed in, use this color. If green is passed in, use this color. So these, all of these things, how you guys set it up is very concise and very easy, right? Oh, almost there. But when you get into a little bit more, if you want a little more tight control on what's going on here, if you want to customize a little bit more, you have to do it a little bit more, use a little bit more code. So there we go. Fun stuff. Yay. Everything's saved. Here is the new link for this thing. There we go. Yeah, you can do this double ampersand stuff here as well. And it works. I'll do 2 of those that way, and 2 of them with the colon null. And then you guys can see the 2 different ways to do that. Okay, cool. Any questions before we walk through how the colors pass around? Yeah, sure. Okay, so we've created a component, and we're using that custom component here for our header. What does this header component return? It returns an H1 with all whatever styling happens inside here. So right now, if we clicked on yellow, then we get color null, color null, color null, color yellow. So we literally are putting color 4 times on this style sheet, which is fine. That's really not a big deal. So if we click on red, we're adding color 4 times, and it's just going to read everything will be null except this color here. All right, so that is, we've got an H1 with these properties on it. Then style properties. So then we go into our header where we're rendering our header component, and you can see we're passing in a props called color. So this prop gets passed down to our new component. So we can come up here inside our new component, and since this is a template literal string, we can do some JavaScript inside the $ curly braces, right? So we're going to do some JavaScript inside all of these sections here. And what you can do with styled components is you can pass in a function. So this is an arrow function, right? This is an argument, and this is the body of the function. So when inside this template literal string, if you have the $ curly braces and pass in a function, that function gets invoked with the props from this component. So gets passed in the props object. We have props.color, which is set to the value of this .state.color. So that's how it's being passed around. If we click on green, we find the green button. There's our green button. Green invokes this .update color, which sets state with our class name. So just a little trick we can grab this class name from the event.target. Event.target.className is green, and that gets set to as the value of our state.color. So then this .state.color gets passed in the string green. Green comes up here into props, and we see props.color equals green. If that's the case, then we're going to set this value as the color of this header. Hopefully that helps. Good. Cool. All right. So let's take a look at today's homework. And we want to come in here. There we go. All the way down to our InstaClone. This is an easy day today. You'll get done with this part of the project very quickly, and you can use any extra time today to go back and rework other parts of this project, style it up better, add some stretches, whatever. So for today, we want to be able to use styled components to add functional styles to your React components. Be able to explain why state-driven views and components are useful patterns for scalability, composability. Don't worry too much about this one. Our focus is mostly on styled components. You've got your setup here. So today is try and replace all the styles you have previously written. Change everything to be a styled component, except for where you need to reference your icon class names. So for today, you're just going to go through your whole project, change everything to a styled component, and use styled components instead of JSX components with CSS. So refactor search bar to use styled components, create a header styled component, header that wraps your entire search bar. What this is right here, this looks a little confusing. Styled component.div. All this means is when this was written, whoever the teacher was teaching it like this: import styled dash components. Let's see. Styled component, maybe? Anyways, so anytime you see this, it's basically just styled.div. So you can import this a number of different ways. You'll see a lot of people import it as SC, and I'll write sc.h1. Since everything we did today was import styled, and we have styled.h1, anywhere you see styled component dot something, just know that it's styled.div, styled.image, styled.header. Cool. So, yep, just follow these, and you're basically going to replace everything that you can with a styled component. And that's it for today. Oh, here we go. So here's the part about state-driven views. So read this article, and that's this part up here, being able to explain state-driven views. Cool. Easy peasy. Let me know if you guys have questions. Again, work on something for 20 minutes. If you can't figure it out on your own, please use things like the help channel, pair programming, and then only after that, reach out to your project manager. So if you can't get help, if you've asked a question here and you can't get it answered and can't figure it out on the help channel, then you can do something like a Zoom with your project manager. Cool. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the sprint project. And then we will be halfway done with React. Time flies. All right, guys, have a great day.